Do you know what true absolute freedom actually costs? Most people think it's permanent, but they are completely wrong. Freedom is a fragile illusion maintained by one simple fact. You haven't crossed paths with an environment that refuses to let you go. Governments don't need concrete walls, razor wire, or armies. The most secure prisons on Earth were carved by the planet itself. Today we're looking at the ultimate islands of exiles. Places where distance, freezing oceans, and hostile terrain erased people from society. Once you cross these waters, the world doesn't just cut you off. It stops believing you ever existed. No philosophy, no mainstream fluff. Just raw geography, brutal survival metrics, and some of Earth's most secure natural cages. Let's decode the first exile zone and step off the edge of the map into a place designed by nature. French Guiana's Devil's Island looks like a postcard from passing ships. Palm trees, warm wind, turquoise water hiding a brutal prison. Up close, it's a 15-acre trap. The French government turned it into an endpoint for dangerous offenders and political prisoners. 9 miles of open Atlantic separated the island from mainland. Those waters contained bull sharks and currents strong enough to pull adults under. Behind the prison camp sat dense rainforest. Malaria, venomous snakes, and brutal terrain made escape almost impossible for anyone who vanished. One name makes this history real. Henri Charrière arrived there in 1933 under prisoner number 46635. His fellow inmates called him Papillon, French for butterfly, because of the tattoo across his chest. Charrière attempted escape multiple times over the years, and each failure sent him back into solitary confinement again. His final attempt came in 1941. He built a makeshift raft from sacks stuffed with coconuts and timed his launch. He threw himself into the open ocean. With no food, no map, and no idea whether currents carried him toward land, he drifted roughly 300 miles, before finally washing onto Venezuela's coast, alive but barely. Venezuelan authorities eventually granted him permanent residency, and he never returned to French soil as a prisoner again. That's the part most people know. What's less known is how many prisoners never survived their attempts to escape. Guards' records show that for every prisoner escaping alive, dozens more disappeared, leaving empty cells and names crossed from lists. Most prisoners were pulled back from the jungle half-starved within days. Others simply disappeared, leaving no body, raft, or explanation behind. The prison finally shut down in 1953, after nearly a century, not because its walls failed, but because nature never needed them. The ocean and jungle had been doing the prison's job for free. Devil's Island closed because the real warden was never human. That was a prison built for criminals. But the next island imprisoned people who hadn't broken a single law. Off Crete's northeast coast sits Spinalonga, a Venetian fortress repurposed in 1903 for a different kind of war against leprosy. Authorities came to diagnose patients' homes, gave them time to gather belongings, then placed them aboard a boat for Spinalonga. People called the journey the crossing of no return, because Greek law treated patients as legally dead after arrival. Their names were struck from civil records. Property was redistributed to relatives, and marriages were automatically dissolved. But Spinalonga's story becomes different here. Instead of collapsing into despair, the patients began building their own functioning community. By the 1930s, the island had a main street, with shops, a cafe, a barbershop, and even its own elected police force. Patients with medical training established a basic clinic, while residents created systems that allowed the community to function independently. A resident named Epaminondas Remoundakis pushed for direct telephone lines, connecting the island with mainland Greece for supplies and medicine. The island operated as a self-governed town for nearly 50 years, until effective sulfone treatments finally made quarantine unnecessary. By 1957, generations had been born, married, and died within those stone walls, never once visiting the mainland. Spinalonga proves something Devil's Island doesn't. Total isolation doesn't always break people. Sometimes it forces them to build society. On Spinalonga, there was nobody else to depend upon. So residents built a functioning community faster and tighter than expected. Governments had used islands to contain criminals and disease. But the next island was built to contain something far more dangerous. The most valuable thing a government ever tried to bury wasn't a person, but an idea powerful enough to threaten an entire system. When an idea becomes dangerous enough, the state can send its enemy across water cold enough to stop anyone following. Island number 3 held the man apartheid South Africa feared most. Yet the ocean eventually broadcast his name across the entire world. 7 miles off Cape Town, in water cold enough to cause hypothermia within an hour, sits the isolated Robben Island. For nearly 2 decades, this was the address of apartheid's most watched enemy. Nelson Mandela, prisoner number 466/64 in year 1964. His cell measured only 8 feet by 7. With a thin straw mat, concrete floor, bucket toilet, and 1 small window. Mandela spent 18 of his 27 years imprisoned here. Most of that time breaking limestone under an intensely bright sun. The state's strategy was calculated, not accidental. Mandela's name was banned from South African media, and photographing him was illegal. The government didn't need to silence him with violence. It simply needed the outside world to forget that Robben Island existed. For years, that strategy worked. International attention remained limited, and Mandela's own daughter was 12 before legally visiting him. But prisoners transformed the quarry into something guards never expected, a hidden educational system built directly inside the prison. Inmates smuggled political texts inside hollowed-out study books, while younger prisoners learned law, economics, and history from older inmates. They later called it Robben Island University. Informal classes happened during work breaks while guards struggled to distinguish lessons from ordinary conversation. Ahmed Kathrada, Walter Sisulu, and Mandela himself ran these classes, literally while swinging pickaxes, using labor to hide their discussions. By 1990, Mandela was released, and the island designed to erase him had instead helped produce future national leadership. 4 years later, apartheid ended, while many former Robben Island prisoners entered the government that replaced the very system imprisoning them. Robben Island held more than 3,000 political prisoners throughout its history. Dozens later became ministers, judges, and parliamentary leaders. Today, former inmates work as tour guides, walking visitors through the same cells where they were once locked away. The state used distance to try killing a movement, but that same distance gave the movement time to organize instead. Every island so far used isolation against people. Svalbard reverses that strategy and uses isolation to protect something instead. This Norwegian archipelago sits roughly 800 miles from the North Pole, farther north than any permanently inhabited settlement. Polar bears outnumber people there, and anyone leaving town must carry a rifle because the surrounding wilderness remains dangerous. Winter brings months of complete darkness, while temperatures regularly fall below -20 degrees Celsius across the frozen landscape. Svalbard has one law that sounds fictional. No one is allowed to die there, because the permafrost never fully thaws. Bodies buried in the local cemetery never completely decompose. Frozen ground preserves remains far longer than normal burial conditions. In the 1950s, scientists studied victims from a 1918 flu outbreak, discovering the virus remained almost intact inside frozen soil. Since then, terminally ill patients and women close to giving birth are flown to mainland Norway because emergency care remains extremely difficult. But Svalbard's brutal isolation created another opportunity. Norway chose this frozen landscape to protect something far more important than people. In 2008, Norway built the Global Seed Vault, deep inside a sandstone mountain, protected by permafrost and blast-proof doors. The vault sits 400 feet inside the mountain, using natural freezing conditions to protect seeds even if the power fails. Inside are more than 1 million seed samples, representing nearly every country on Earth and preserving humanity's agricultural future. Countries that otherwise don't cooperate keep backup samples together, including North Korea and the United States, stored side by side. The idea is simple. If catastrophe destroys crops worldwide, these frozen seeds could help restore food supplies for future generations. But even this supposedly secure facility faced an unexpected threat. Unusually warm Arctic temperatures caused meltwater to flood the entrance tunnel. In 2017, Norway spent more than $4 million waterproofing the facility, proving isolation cannot completely protect anything from climate change. Every other island on this list used distance and isolation to make sure something could never escape, return, or reconnect with the outside world. Svalbard uses that exact same distance to guarantee that something valuable can always survive, even after catastrophe. 4 islands, for completely different reasons: for exile, crime, disease, politics, and now survival itself. But the method never changes. Governments used water, jungle, freezing ground, and distance that already existed naturally. They didn't need to invent new technology. Geography itself provided the walls, barriers, and isolation required to finish the job. Devil's Island proved nature can outlast any prison sentence, while Spinalonga proved isolated people can build society instead. Robben Island proved you can cage a man's body, but you cannot control what he teaches the people beside him. And Svalbard proves something even stranger. The same emptiness that once erased people can now help protect an entire species' food supply. 3 of these islands are still standing today, empty, silent, and open to visitors walking through places that once held lives hostage. The 4th remains active right now, sealed inside a mountain, waiting for a catastrophe that hopefully never happens. There are still places on this planet the modern world hasn't fully mapped, connected, or explained, and some may hold things undiscovered. These islands remind us that geography can become a prison, without walls, guards, weapons, or technology being required. Distance can isolate criminals, quarantine disease, suppress political movements, and even protect humanity's food supply from future disasters. The same natural barriers that once separated people can become protection when humanity needs somewhere secure to preserve something precious. Devil's Island, Spinalonga, Robben Island, and Svalbard. Each reveals a different purpose behind the powerful geography of isolation. The modern world feels completely connected, yet these places prove enormous portions of our planet still remain difficult to reach. And some of those isolated places may still be holding secrets, waiting for someone to cross the water and uncover them. If you want the next one uncovered, hit subscribe before it disappears from your feed. I'm the voice behind Lost Archives. Stay curious.